Zara Johnson was 12 years old, 4'8" in her school shoes, and she walked into Edmund Hartley's study like she owned every inch of it. She didn't knock. She pushed the heavy oak door open with both hands, stepped inside, and stood right in the middle of the Persian rug that probably cost more than everything her mother had ever earned in her life. She looked directly at the man behind the desk, the man who owned this estate, 3 companies, and apparently the silence of every adult in this household. And she spoke first. "Mr. Hartley, my mother hasn't been paid in 6 weeks. Pay her today, and I'll save your son." The room stopped. Edmund Hartley was on a phone call. He lowered the phone slowly, the way a man does when something has so thoroughly disrupted his reality that his body needs a moment to catch up with his brain. He was 61 years old. He had sat across tables from senators, from investment bankers, from men who had tried to ruin him and failed. He had never, not once in his life, been interrupted by a child. Gerald Fitch, the estate overseer, was the first to move. He stepped forward from his position near the bookshelf, his face tight with embarrassment and barely controlled outrage. "Zara, this is not the place. I'm talking to Mr. Hartley," Zara said, without looking at Gerald. She kept her eyes on Edmund. "Not you." Edmund set the phone down on the desk. He studied her, the neat braids, the second-hand blazer that was slightly too big for her shoulders, the absolute stillness of someone who has decided they have nothing to lose. He didn't speak yet. He was thinking. Miriam Johnson appeared in the doorway a half-second later, breathless, her hands pressed together in front of her chest the way she pressed them when she prayed. "Zara, baby, I am so sorry. She just ran off. I didn't know she... Manga." Zara still didn't turn around. "I told you I was going to handle it. You can't just..." "I already did." Edmund leaned back in his leather chair. The phone on his desk buzzed once and went quiet. He folded his hands together and looked at this child standing in the center of his study, and something moved behind his eyes, something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite irritation. It was something closer to reluctant attention. "Save my son," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. "You're 12 years old." "Yes, sir. Every specialist in this country has looked at Noah. Doctors from 3 different hospitals, neurologists, immunologists, a child psychologist from London." He paused. "They haven't saved him." "I know," Zara said, "because they've been looking at the wrong thing." Gerald made a sound in his throat. "Mr. Hartley, I really must insist." "Gerald." Edmund raised one hand, just slightly. Gerald went quiet. Edmund kept looking at Zara. "What do you mean, the wrong thing?" "I mean, they've been treating his body," Zara said, "when it's his mind that's been hurt. But before I say anything else, I need you to pay my mother what you owe her. 6 weeks. Today. In full. Then we can talk about Noah." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. Miriam had covered her mouth with both hands. Gerald looked like he was experiencing a medical event. Edmund Hartley, who had not been told what to do by anyone in approximately 40 years, sat very still in his chair and looked at a 12-year-old girl. Then, from behind them all came another voice. "Edmund." Vivian Hartley stood in the doorway. She was still in her morning clothes, a silk robe over her blouse, her hair pinned up but not yet finished. She must have heard the commotion from the hallway. She looked at Zara. She looked at her husband. She walked calmly into the room and stood beside Miriam. "The child is right," she said, simply, "about the wages. That is not a negotiation. That gets handled today." Edmund looked at his wife. Something shifted in his jaw. "Vivian, this is not the time." "When is the time, Edmund?" "Miriam has been in this house for 4 years. She has worked through everything, through Noah's illness, through the chaos of the last 6 months, without complaint. 6 weeks without pay." Vivian's voice was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that was louder than shouting. "If we cannot do this one thing correctly, then we cannot stand here and pretend we are good people." Edmund stood up. He walked to the window that looked out over the grounds and stood there with his hands clasped behind his back for a long moment. No one in the room said anything. Miriam stared at the floor. Zara waited. Then Edmund turned around. "Why has payroll been delayed?" he asked, not to Gerald, but to the room. Gerald cleared his throat. "Sir, as I explained in my report last month, The redirection of household funds toward Master Noah's medical expenses created a temporary shortfall in the operating budget. I expected it to resolve itself within. It has been 6 weeks, Vivian said. Gerald looked at the floor. Get the accounts manager on the phone, Edmund said. Miriam Johnson is to be paid in full today. Every penny owed. He looked at Gerald. Today, Gerald. Not this week. Today. Gerald nodded and left quickly, clearly relieved to have somewhere to be other than that room. Miriam let out a breath so long and so slow that Zara finally turned around to look at her. Her mother's eyes were wet. Zara reached out and took her hand briefly and squeezed it once, the way you do when you want someone to know you see them without making them cry. Then Zara turned back to Edmund. Thank you, she said. Now, I need to talk about Noah. Edmund looked at her for a long moment. You're very sure of yourself. I'm sure about Noah, Zara said. I've been sure since the 3rd week we were here. And what exactly are you sure about? Zara glanced toward the door and then back at Edmund. I'd rather show you than tell you. Take me to his room. Edmund almost smiled. Almost. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, shrugged it on slowly, and looked at Vivian. She gave him a look that said, quite plainly, that she would be coming too, whether he invited her or not. He looked at Miriam. You as well, he said quietly, and it was the first time he had ever spoken to Miriam Johnson in a tone that sounded like an invitation rather than an instruction. They went upstairs. Noah Hartley's bedroom was at the end of the east corridor, behind a door that was always slightly ajar. The curtains were pulled halfway across the windows, leaving the room in a gray half-light that made everything look like it existed slightly outside of time. There was a nightstand covered in medicine bottles. 11 of them, Zara counted because she always counted, and a tray with a bowl of soup that had been brought up an hour ago and hadn't been touched. The room smelled of eucalyptus and something else underneath it, something sadder. The particular smell of a space where someone has been still for too long. Noah was propped up against his pillows when they came in. He was 10 years old, slight, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's careful mouth. He was wearing pajamas that were clean and pressed, which meant someone, Miriam, almost certainly, had been ironing his pajamas while she herself went unpaid. He looked at the door when they came in, and his expression settled quickly into the practiced blankness of a child who has learned to perform illness. Eyes slightly heavy, face slack, breath measured. But for just 1 second, 1/2 second before the performance settled into place, his eyes found Zara's face, and something in them woke up. Zara saw it. She was the only one who did, because the adults were busy looking at the frailty, the paleness, the medicine bottles, the untouched soup. They were looking for the evidence they already expected to find. Zara was looking at Noah. Hello, she said. Hi, he said, in a voice that was softer than his natural voice, but not by as much as he thought. Edmund stepped forward. Noah, this is Zara. She's Mrs. Johnson's daughter. She's here to visit with you for a moment. Okay, Noah said. Vivian sat down in the chair at the bedside. Edmund stood near the window. Miriam stayed near the door. Everyone waited. Zara walked to the foot of the bed, pulled the ottoman closer with her foot, and sat down on it as if she lived there. I need to talk to Noah by myself, she said. Edmund stiffened. That's not. 5 minutes, Zara said. You can wait just outside. Leave the door open if you want. She looked at Noah. Is that okay with you? Noah glanced at his father, then back at Zara. His voice, when it came, was a little more like his own. Yeah, that's okay. The adults filed out slowly, the way adults do when they know they are being managed by someone half their size and cannot figure out how to object to it. Vivian was the last to go. She paused in the doorway and looked at Zara with an expression that was equal parts trust and fear and something very close to hope. Then it was just the two of them. Zara didn't say anything medical. She didn't ask how he was feeling or how long he'd been sick or whether the soup was good. She said, Do you like animals? Noah blinked. What? Animals? Do you have a favorite? He thought about it. Dogs, I think. We used to have one. Biscuit. He died 2 years ago. What kind? Golden retriever. Fat one. He used to sit on my dad's feet and Dad would pretend to be annoyed, but he wasn't. Zara nodded. There's a cat that comes into the garden around 3 o'clock every afternoon. Gray one with a torn ear. I've been leaving bits of bread out for it. She paused. I don't think cats eat bread, actually. But it comes anyway. Noah almost smiled. Cats definitely don't eat bread. I know that now. There was a silence. But it was a comfortable silence. The kind that means two people are actually in the same room together instead of performing at each other. Then Zara said, "You move differently when the grown-ups aren't watching." Noah went very still. Not the performance still of the sick child. The real still. The caught still. "What do you mean?" he said carefully. "When your dad came into the room, you sort of settled. Like you were putting something on." She tilted her head. "You were just talking to me, and your voice was normal, and you were fine, and then when you remember they were there, you got quieter and smaller." Noah didn't say anything. "I'm not going to tell on you," Zara said. "I just want to understand." "There's nothing to understand." "Okay," she said simply. She didn't argue. She just waited. He lasted about 40 seconds. "It's not like I'm faking it," he said suddenly, a little fiercely. "I actually do feel sick. My stomach hurts. My head hurts. I'm not lying." "I never said you were lying," Zara said. "But you think I am." "No," she said. "I think you really do feel sick. I think it's completely real. I just think the sickness started somewhere that isn't your body." She looked at him steadily. "What day of the week do you feel the worst?" The question surprised him. He hadn't expected it. Adults always asked what hurt or how bad, or on a scale of 1 to 10. No one had ever asked when. "Sunday," he said before he could stop himself. "Sunday nights. And Monday mornings before my mom would come in. Before she'd come in to get you ready for school." He looked at the quilt. He picked at a thread on it. He said nothing. Zara got up, went to the door, and said, "Mr. Hartley. Mrs. Hartley, can you come back in, please?" Edmund sat on the edge of the window seat. Vivian had moved back to the chair beside Noah's bed. Miriam stood near the door again, watching with the careful eyes of someone who has learned that the best thing she can do in this house is be present without being noticed. Zara stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Edmund. "Ask him," she said. "Ask him what day he feels worst." Edmund frowned. "What kind of—" "Please," she said. "Just ask him." Edmund looked at his son. His voice, when he spoke, came out more gently than he usually managed. "Noah, what day of the week is hardest for you?" Noah looked at his father. For a moment his face was completely unreadable, a child calculating the distance between honesty and safety. Then he said Sunday nights. Edmund let that land. "Sunday nights. And Monday mornings," Noah said, barely above a whisper. "Before Mom would come to get me up." The room was so quiet Zara could hear the clock in the hallway. Vivian reached out and took Noah's hand. "Baby," she said softly, "did something happen at Crestfield?" The word, the name of the school, did something visible to Noah's face. It was like watching weather change. His jaw tightened. His eyes went to the quilt again. "Noah," Edmund said, and his voice was lower now, stripped of its authority, something more uncertain and more human underneath it. "Look at me." Noah looked up. "Did someone hurt you at school?" The silence went on long enough that Zara counted to 7 inside her head. Then Noah said, in the voice of someone who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally, exhaustedly, decided to put it down. It wasn't just one thing. It was lots of things. Over a long time. Vivian's hand tightened around his. She didn't speak. She was smart enough to know that what was needed right now was not comfort, but space. The space for him to keep going. "There are these boys," Noah said. "Leo Crane and Bastian Foyle. They're in the year above me. It started with just, they'd say stuff. About my name, about how I talked, that I was soft. Stuff like that." He paused. "And then it got to where they'd wait for me. After football practice, behind the sports hall, or at the lockers." Another pause. "I didn't tell anyone because Leo's dad is on the school board. And Bastian's family donated the new library. And I knew, I just knew, that if I said something, nothing would happen. Or it would get worse." Edmund had gone very still. The stillness of a man who was trying very hard to stay inside himself. "Did any teachers see?" Vivian asked. "Mr. Dobbs saw something once. He looked right at it. Then he walked away." Noah's voice was flat when he said this. Not angry, just flat. The way you speak about something you have already accepted as simply the way things are. "So I stopped going. I started getting sick. On Sunday nights, my stomach would start hurting, and by Monday morning, I couldn't move. And Mom would say I didn't have to go, and I just didn't go. He stopped. He looked at Vivian. His eyes were bright now, but he was holding it together, barely, with both hands. I wasn't pretending, he said again. My stomach really did hurt. It really did. I know, Vivian said. I know, sweetheart. Of course it did. His voice finally cracked just slightly at the edges. I just couldn't go back. And being sick was the only way I didn't have to. Edmund stood up. He walked to the far wall and stood facing it for a moment. His shoulders were tight. Vivian watched him with careful eyes. Zara watched him too. Miriam, from her position near the door, said quietly, "The body knows what the mind is carrying. Sometimes it speaks the only way it knows how." Nobody argued with her. Edmund turned around. His face had changed. It had been controlled before. The steady, managed face of a powerful man. Now it was something rawer, less defended. The face of a father who has just understood something terrible that he should have understood months ago. He walked back to the bed. He sat down on the edge of it, right beside Noah, something he hadn't done since Noah was very small. He put his hand on the back of Noah's head, awkwardly, the way fathers do when they know they should embrace, but have forgotten how. "You should have told me," he said, but his voice didn't have accusation in it. Just grief. "I would have. You would have been angry," Noah said simply. "And it would have gone back to Leo's dad, and then Leo would have." He stopped. "I didn't want to make it bigger." Edmund closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them. "You're not going back there," he said. "Not this week. Not until this is dealt with. Do you hear me?" Noah looked up at him. "Promise." It was such a small word. Such an ordinary child's word. It broke something open in the room. "I promise," Edmund said. The exhale that left Noah's body was long and slow and visible, like watching a knot come undone. His shoulders dropped. His jaw unclenched. He leaned, just slightly, into his father's side, and Edmund put his arm around him. And for a long moment, nobody spoke at all. Zara stood at the foot of the bed and watched. Then she looked at Vivian, who was watching her husband hold their son with the expression of someone seeing something they had waited a very long time to see. "He doesn't need more doctors," Zara said quietly. "He needs to know he doesn't have to pretend anymore." Vivian nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I think that's right." 2 days later, Edmund Hartley drove himself. No driver, which was unusual enough to make Gerald Fitch look twice, to Crestfield Preparatory School. He did not call ahead. He parked in the visitor's bay, walked into the reception, and asked to see Headmaster Reeve. He was kept waiting 11 minutes, which he suspected was a power move, and which he let pass without comment. When he was finally shown into the headmaster's office, Daniel Reeve was already behind his desk with the composed, careful expression of a man who has been warned something uncomfortable was coming. He was in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, with the particular polish of someone who has spent decades managing wealthy parents and their expectations. "Mr. Hartley," he said, extending a hand. "I was very sorry to hear about Noah's continued illness. How is he doing?" Edmund sat down. He did not take the coffee that was offered. "He's better," he said, "now that he's not terrified of coming here." Reeve's expression didn't change. He was good at that. "I'm not sure I follow." "I think you do," Edmund said. "I'm going to ask you some questions, Mr. Reeve, and I would appreciate specific answers. Not reassurances. Answers." He paused. "When did you first become aware that Leo Crane and Bastionfoyle were targeting my son?" A pause. There were some reports of social friction between students. "When," Edmund said again. Reeve's jaw moved. "October." Edmund had suspected something like this. He had not been prepared for the cold that moved through him when he heard confirmed. October. His son had spent 7 months in that bed. 7 months of specialists and scans and blood draws and nothing. And this man had known since October. "October," Edmund repeated. "We monitored the situation carefully." "You monitored it. These are complex social dynamics, Mr. Hartley. When the families involved when there are relationships between the school and..." He stopped. "Say it plainly," Edmund said. Reeve looked uncomfortable. The Crane and Foyle families are significant institutional donors. Any formal action against their sons creates complications. Edmund looked at him for a long moment. He was very calm. He had learned, a long time ago, that calm was more frightening than anger to people like Daniel Reeve. Anger gave them something to manage. Calm gave them nothing to hold on to. "My son," Edmund said, "stopped being able to leave his bed. He convinced his body to be ill rather than come back here. Not because he was weak, because he was 10 years old and he understood, with perfect clarity, that no one in this building was going to help him. He let that sit in the air. And you're telling me you chose the Crane and Foyle family's donations over the safety of child?" Reeve opened his mouth. "Do not tell me you didn't know," Edmund said. "You just told me you knew in October." Another silence. Longer this time. "What are you intending to do?" Reeve asked finally. "I intend to give you the opportunity to do this correctly," Edmund said. "I'm not interested in destroying this school. I am interested in my son being safe and the people who hurt him facing real consequences. If you handle this properly, transparently, with documentation, I will leave you to manage it. If I find out it has been buried or minimized, I will take it somewhere that documents cannot be buried." He stood up. "I'd like written confirmation of the action being taken. Within the week." He walked out. He sat in the car for a moment in the car park, hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere yet. He thought about Noah saying, "I just knew that nothing would happen." The absolute, simple certainty of it. The way a 10-year-old boy had looked at the adults around him and understood, without anyone telling him, that the system would protect the wrong people. He took out his phone and called the first number. "Henry." He kept his voice level. "This is Edmund Hartley. Your son Leo has been bullying my son at Crestfield since September. I am calling to tell you directly, man to man, before the school's formal investigation begins. I am giving you the opportunity to speak to your son yourself. I would strongly recommend you take it." Henry Crane started to say something about boys being boys and misunderstandings, and "I'm not interested in a conversation about framing," Edmund said. "I'm interested in whether you intend to take responsibility for your son's behavior. Think about it. Call me back." He hung up. He called a second number. Bastian Foyle's father picked up on the third ring. He was more careful, more lawyerly. He said he would need to understand the full picture before he could respond. "The full picture," Edmund said, "is that your 13-year-old son and his friend cornered my 10-year-old son behind a sports hall on multiple occasions. A teacher witnessed at least one incident and did nothing. My son spent 7 months unable to leave his bed because he was more afraid of coming to school than he was of being ill." A pause. "That's the full picture, Mr. Foyle." He drove home slowly, taking the long route without deciding to. He passed the playing fields where he had once watched Noah play a football match in year 3, the last one he'd attended before work took over, then before Noah stopped going to school altogether. He had told himself it was temporary, that children were resilient, that the specialist would find the answer and life would correct itself the way life usually did when you had enough money and the right connections. He had believed, with the confidence of a man who had rarely been wrong about anything material, that this was a problem with a professional solution. He had been so wrong, and the wrongness of it sat in his chest now, like something physical, a weight he suspected he would carry for a long time, and perhaps should. When he got back to Ashford Manor, Zara was in the garden with Noah. Edmund stood at the kitchen window and watched them for a moment without going out. Noah was sitting on the low garden wall, and Zara was crouched on the ground a few feet away, very still, looking at something in the grass. They were talking. He could see their mouths moving, but he couldn't hear the words through the glass. Then Noah laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a small laugh. It was the laugh of a child who has forgotten for a moment that they were supposed to be sad, the kind of laugh that catches you off guard and takes over completely. He laughed until he had to hold his stomach, and Zara grinned without looking up from whatever was in the grass, clearly pleased with herself. Edmund stood very still at the window. He could not remember the last time he had heard that sound. Miriam came into the kitchen behind him. She saw what he was looking at. She stood beside him quietly for a moment. She had stood quietly beside things her entire adult life. She had learned, early and efficiently, that quiet was the safest posture in homes like this one. That the best thing she could do was be competent and invisible and grateful and undemanding. She had taught herself not to want more than what was offered, because wanting more than what was offered was a kind of vulnerability she could not afford. And then her daughter had walked into this man's study without knocking and demanded what was owed, and Miriam had been so frightened she had felt ill, and then so proud she had felt the same thing in a different key. "What is she showing him?" Edmund asked. "A family of beetles," Miriam said. "She's been tracking them for a week. She has names for all of them." Edmund almost laughed himself. He swallowed it. "Mrs. Johnson," he said. "Yes, sir." He turned to face her. It was a slightly uncomfortable thing, looking directly at Miriam Johnson, at this woman who had cleaned his home and ironed his son's pajamas and been left unpaid for 6 weeks, and had still sent her daughter into his study with her head up and her heart right. "I owe you more than wages," he said. "I owe you an apology." Miriam looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Then I'll take both." He nodded. "You'll have both." The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was the thing about real recovery. It wasn't dramatic. It happened in small, ordinary moments that added up to something. Noah eating a full breakfast for the first time in months. Noah asking if he could come downstairs and watch television in the living room instead of staying in his room. Noah standing at the kitchen counter while Miriam cooked and handing her things when she asked without being asked twice, because he liked being useful and he had missed being useful. Zara came on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school because Miriam worked those days. She and Noah had settled into a rhythm that operated entirely outside adult comprehension. They talked about beetles and bread-eating cats, and what the clouds were shaped like, and whether dogs actually understood what you were saying to them, or just liked the sound. They never talked about Leo Crane, or Bastion Foil, or Crestfield. There would be time for that later, when Noah was ready. Zara understood, with a practicality and patience unusual for her age, that healing was not a destination but a direction. Edmund watched from a respectful distance and tried, awkwardly and imperfectly, to do better. He asked Noah smaller questions. Not, "How are you feeling?" which invited performances, but "What did you dream about?" And "Would you want to try a game after dinner?" And "Is there something you want to eat that we haven't had in a while?" Small questions with small, honest answers that slowly, over time, added up to real conversation. Noah began to answer without calculating first. That was how Edmund knew it was working. Vivian reorganized the household quietly and efficiently, the way she did most things. Miriam's role expanded. She was given a proper title, household director, and a proper salary, and 2 junior staff who answered her. Gerald Fitch, sensing which way the wind was blowing, began being significantly more courteous to everyone around him. In March, the school sent formal written confirmation. Leo Crane and Bastion Foil had been suspended, pending a full behavioral investigation. 2 teachers, including the one who had looked away, had been called to account. Headmaster Reeve had sent a letter that was so carefully worded it almost said nothing, but between the lines it said, "We know what we did wrong." Edmund filed it and said nothing publicly. He had promised to let them handle it if they handled it correctly. He kept his promises. In April, Noah asked if he could go outside and kick a ball around. Vivian had to leave the room when he asked, because she did not want him to see her cry. Edmund went out with him. He was in his work clothes and his good shoes, and he did not care even slightly. He stood in the garden of Ashford Manor on a Tuesday afternoon and kicked a football back and forth with his 10-year-old son, badly and enthusiastically, and Noah laughed at him for it. And Edmund laughed back, and somewhere in the laughter something that had been clenched tight in the house for 7 months finally, properly, let go. It was a Thursday in early May when Edmund found Zara sitting on the garden wall alone, watching the gray cat with the torn ear pick its way across the lawn with great dignity. "You're not going to keep leaving it, Bread, are you?" Edmund said, coming to stand beside her. "I found out what cats actually eat," Zara said. "I've been leaving bits of chicken from the kitchen. Mrs. Barrett said it was fine." "Did she?" "She likes the cat too." "She just doesn't say so." Edmund sat down on the wall beside her. Not above her. Beside her. "I went back to Crestfield today," he said. "I know. Mum told me. They've put proper policies in place. Anti-bullying board. Independent reporting. Anyone can report anonymously, including students." He paused. "It won't undo what happened, but it might stop it happening to the next child." Zara nodded, watching the cat. That's the right thing, she said. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Edmund said, I wanted to thank you properly. What you did, coming into my study like that, saying what you said, it changed things. Zara glanced at him sideways. I know. He almost smiled. You're not going to be falsely modest about it. Why would I be? She looked back at the cat. I did what I came to do. You came to get your mother paid, he said. I came to do both things, she corrected. I always meant to do both things. I just knew you wouldn't listen to the second thing until the first thing was done. That's how it works with people like you. People like me, he repeated. People who are used to being the most important person in the room, she said, without malice, the way you state a fact. You stop hearing other people. You don't mean to. You just stop. Someone has to make you hear again. Edmund was quiet for a long moment. The cat sat down in the middle of the lawn, curled its tail around itself, and looked at them with the imperious indifference that is the sole birthright of cats. You know, he said finally, I've been thinking about what you said. About Noah's illness starting somewhere other than his body. Yes. Do you know how long I've been running this family the same way I run a company? He didn't say it like he was looking for an answer. He said it like he was just understanding it himself. Managing outcomes. Making decisions. Keeping the structure in place. He paused. I never asked Noah what he was afraid of. I asked doctors what was wrong. Never my son what was wrong. You're asking now, Zara said. Too late. No, she said, firmly, the way she said everything. Not too late. Just later than it should have been. She looked at him. That's different. Edmund looked at her, this 12-year-old girl in her second-hand blazer with chicken in her pocket for a stray cat, and felt something that the powerful rarely let themselves feel, genuine humility. Not the performed kind, the real kind that sits in your chest like ballast and steadies you. You helped us, he said. All of us. More than I can account for properly. I know, she said simply. You can thank Mom by keeping her in her new position and not being ridiculous about the budget again. She stood up, brushed off the back of her school skirt. And you can thank me by making sure what happened to Noah doesn't happen to any other kid at Crestfield, because the school was too worried about donations to act. Already in motion, he said. She nodded, satisfied. Good. She jumped down from the wall and went toward the house, stopping only to crouch briefly in the grass and place a small piece of chicken near the gray cat, who regarded it with the appropriate royal suspicion. Edmund watched her go. Then he looked back at the garden, the spring light coming through in long, warm angles, the lawn green and soft, the sound of Noah's voice somewhere inside the house calling out to Miriam about something ordinary and bright. And he sat there for a long time, just sitting the way a man does when he is finally, genuinely, in no hurry to be anywhere else. Some lessons cannot be bought. Some truths cannot be found by the most expensive doctors or the most thorough investigations or the most powerful connections. Some things only arrive when you are quiet enough to hear a 12-year-old girl tell you, with perfect clarity, exactly what is wrong and exactly what needs to happen next. Edmund Hartley had spent 61 years being the most important person in the room. It had taken one child, one morning, in one study, to show him what he'd been missing. He would not forget it. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about the children in your life, please subscribe, leave a comment below, and give this video a like. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and we read every single comment. Tell us, what moment in this story hit you the hardest?